And welcome back to the show. According to a 2019 study by Coqual, corporate America's current efforts to increase diversity are failing. Black professionals hold only 3.2% of all executive or senior leadership roles and less than 1% of all Fortune 500 CEO positions. Our first guest recently released their book, Black Faces in High Places, which is an essential guide for Black professionals who are moving up through their industries, but need a roadmap on how to get to the top, and not just get to the top, but stay there. We're pleased to have as joining us as guests, co-founder and CEO of BCT Partners and author, Dr. Randal Pinkett, and then the co-founder of BCT Partners and author, Dr. Jeffrey Robinson. And thank you both for joining us here, and a pleasure to have you both today.
All right, thanks for having us.
Here. Yep.
I'll start first with the book, Black Faces in White Places, and then you've got Black Faces in High Places. Black Faces in High Places, of course, being the latest release. And talk to us about how this book actually came about.
Sure, happy to share. And again, thank you for having us on the program. We wrote Black Faces in White Places in 2010. And many will recall this was the age of Obama, a much different environment, a much different atmosphere. But the issues we highlighted in the book were a reflection of our own lived experiences. Having been Black faces in many white places, we knew what it was like, as I'm sure you do, to be one of the few or the only one. And how do you navigate environments where you see very few reflections of yourself and not lose a sense of who you are? Fast forward 2020, when we contemplated writing the sequel, I call it the remix, a much different environment. We're in the post-Trump administration era. We're in the George Floyd era. We're in the pandemic era, where a great many conversations like those you highlight here on this program around equity, around representation, around leadership, and around inequity prompted us to say, this might be the right time for a follow-up to talk more specifically about how can Black leaders reach the top and stay there and pull the levers at their disposal to effectuate change and be unapologetic about how they accomplish that, recognizing that we need Black leadership now more than ever, given the times and the era that we're now living in. So that's how the book came to fruition.
Yeah, and Dr. Robinson, I mean, obviously, to be in a position of prominence, to be up there at the top of the ladder, it's one thing to be there. It's another thing to stay there, and it's another thing to feel welcome there. And what we find many times when we see Black professionals is you can reach the top, you can be there, and people can say, "Hey, man, oh, that's a great spot," but they don't know. They see the glory, but they don't know the story, if you will. They don't know what it really takes in order to be able to stay there. Speak to us about really that struggle, because even though you're there, you're fighting a real uphill battle.
Well, you're absolutely right. The story, we actually tell some of those stories in our book, because as you said, you might see somebody at the top of the organization, but the question is, well, how did they get there, and what did they face out on their way up? The challenges are immense. There's a lack of representation at the top. You led off the show talking about some of those statistics. Even in the Fortune 500, we're at 1%. There's 5 Black CEOs in the Fortune 500. So once you get there, one of the questions that's often asked of us is not only what was the route, but when you're there, do you have to sell out? Do you have to sort of abandon who you are to be there at the top? And, I know that's one of the narratives people put out there on it, but we found some great examples of people who have used that platform for the good of the community. And for that, we not only applaud their efforts, we highlight them because we think that is part of the story too. And then there's this last part about belonging. Here's one thing that we do know. When Black people get to the tops of organizations, especially in sort of this modern era, they make way for everybody to feel included and to belong. They change the dynamic their leadership matters because, everybody wants to talk about inclusion, but when you have a Black leader or other people of color at the top of an organization, not only is it symbolic, but it's substantial because what they do, what their experience and how they have done things in the organization is going to be different than perhaps how it's been done in the past. And that matters for everybody in the organization.
Yeah. Dr. Pinkett, you brought up the post-Trump era. You used the name Donald Trump, and that name is very familiar to you. You were on The Apprentice. You actually won The Apprentice. And I remember that episode very vividly because at the time you had outclassed your opponent, but yet and still, Mr. Trump wanted to go ahead and call it a tie. So we have the very first tie ever on The Apprentice. And it really became a symbolism to America and to, and to those throughout of what that really is. Here it is, you're educationally qualified. Here it is, you've done the work. Here it is, you've done everything that you need to do. But then when it gets to the final episode and you get to make this choice of a clear-cut winner, you still have to struggle and say, can we have a tie? And it seems as though that story that played out on national television is the story for so many people who work as African-American professionals, both men and women, that when they get to the top, you could have the credentials, but yet and still that diversity is not being spread, or that, that promotion or that, that raise is not there. Talk to us about the takeaways from your experience and how it really correlates to your work and what you're talking about right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for those that didn't see my finale of The Apprentice, or nowadays, because it was some 16 years ago, if they weren't alive, when my finale of The Apprentice.
Hold on, I quietly just dated myself, but it's all right. It's all good.
Right, and you not so quietly dated me.
Well, I'll just stay with me right now.
No, I'm willing to own it. I'm willing to own it. It's all right, Daren. All right.
All right.
So yes, Donald asked me to share the title, and I was very clear, and Dr. Robinson helped me prepare for that finale. So he knows all the steps that led in. I was very clear in that moment. If you are going to hire anyone tonight, it's going to be me, and it's only going to be one. Those are almost my words verbatim. And my message at the time is my message now. If you have earned the victory, do not be afraid to claim the victory. But you make an important point. Alfred Edmond, editor-in-chief of Black Enterprise, wrote a blog after my finale, and he said what you said, almost his exact words. What happened to Randal happens to millions of African Americans, only they did not have a camera there to show it. And it is the challenge of Black leadership that we have a different set of rules that we experience than everyone else. And I'll be very candid here in saying it was a very difficult time for me, given the criticism and given the controversy of my finale, because you had Black people on one hand saying, yeah, he was right. And you had white people vilifying me saying, why didn't he share? And I say that to say this. One of our core strategic actions in the book is strategic action number 1 about self-determination. It's knowing who you are. If I did not have a foundation of knowing who I was and being centered in my identity and my purpose, by the time that finale arrived, if I did not do that work before, it was far too late. Because once the pressure came of criticism and vilification and et cetera, if you don't know who you are, you can easily succumb to that. And in the book, we tell stories of folks who did succumb to the pressure of being at the top. The book is here to say, do the work that we're offering up, that when you do find yourself at the top in these moments, under these pressures, you're prepared to not just get there, but to stay there and to know who you are and that you belong there. I knew I belonged in that finale. I knew I won, and I wasn't afraid to claim it.
Right. And thank goodness you stood up for yourself, because if you didn't, I think we would have seen a tie. And for those of us who were watching, I was like, please don't do it. Don't do it. Listen, Dr. Robinson, I was there and I was stuck. I was like, what in the world? We never had a tie before. No, you give the black man his
That's
due,
right.
you know, and that's exactly what I felt. And Dr. Robinson, let me bring you in here and have this conversation, because when you write this book, you know, Black Faces in High Places, you really go ahead and you go talk to some people who are really in high places. And you got some really powerful people that you actually had a chance to talk to. We talk about Michelle Obama. You talk about Oprah Winfrey. Talk to us about some of the other faces that you were able to bring that are in these high places that actually rendered their voice to your work.
Oh yeah. So we had two strategies. We did interviews and then we did profiles. So certainly there's some people out there, some of the sort of luminaries like Ken Chenault and the Obamas and Oprah, who there's plenty of publicly available information to do profiles and learn some of the things that they did. But we also did some really interesting interviews. We interviewed people like Bob Johnson and Kathy Hughes. Now, some people get the impression that this book is only about sort of the corporate side of things. But in actuality, we cover those folks who are leaders in corporate America, those folks who are entrepreneurial leaders, those in nonprofits, and those in the social sector and politics. We cover them all. We even have people who we interviewed for the first book, like Don Thompson, who became who was at the time we interviewed him, the chief operating officer at McDonald's. And then by the time we wrote the second book, he had already been CEO and had retired. And to see some of the great work that he's done. So we're getting these stories. We're tracking the stories of people like Ursula Burns and Angela Glover Blackwell and a whole myriad of others. And then we did something that isn't always done in books like this. We said, okay, what did we learn from these folks? We got like 40 different folks that we interviewed and profiled in the book. And we said, well, what did we learn? And how could those things be valuable for the next generation to come? And that's where we got the 10 strategic actions that will help you to reach the top and to get there. So that's what makes what we think is a very powerful combination of stories and understanding what the path was, but also combining that with these 10 strategic actions, these 10 themes that we pull through the book and how they're discussed in a way that people can use the tools and tips for themselves.
I won't make you tell the whole content of the book, but Dr. Randal, please take us through, what important strategic actions that you must take. I mean, we laughed about it, but it was very serious. Standing up for yourself is huge, and voicing your credibility and your credentials is huge. But what would you consider as the primary strategic action, particularly for a Black professional that's trying to make it in the highest form of office?
Absolutely. And I won't belabor the point other than to say the strategic actions in the book build upon each other. Strategy 2 is built on 1. Strategy 10 is built upon 9 down to 1. In other words, strategic action 1 is the foundation. It's the foremost, it's the most fundamental of all the 10 strategic actions. And that's what we discussed a moment ago, exercising self-determination. Now, some might ponder, why are you talking about self-determination in a book about business? That sounds like Kwanzaa. What are you talking about? That's Kuji Chagalia.
That's right.
But again, it gets to this fundamental premise that if you have not defined yourself, by the time you get to the top, it's far too late. But there are other strategic actions, such as number 3, around finding meaning. We bring in this Japanese framework on meaning called Ikigai. If you don't know about Ikigai, you better check that out. 7 and 8 get to what Dr. Robinson talked about. We talked about thinking and acting like an intrapreneur, and then thinking and acting like an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur being those who embrace the entrepreneur's mindset in an established organization. And then strategic action number 9 talks about scale and transforming systems, which is really about having those levers of change at your disposal and wielding those levers economically, socially, et cetera, to benefit our communities and benefit others.
Dr. Robinson, I want to bring you in on this one here. I'm particular in what I'm saying. I'm saying Dr. Randal, I'm saying Dr. Robinson, because guess what? If you're in other circles, people would say, hey, Jeffrey, hey, Randal. But the fact of the matter is, both of you have earned doctorates, and it's not something that always gets the publicity. And people have a tendency to dummy down our credentials. And yet and still, when we're a Black professional, it seems as though you have to work twice as hard just to have your credentials recognized. And when we talk about this, in the work world, what can we do in terms of enhancing our visibility? Because for me to be able to say Dr. Randal, to me to be able to say Dr. Robinson, it gives an opportunity for a young person who looks like us to be able to say, listen, you know what? There's somebody who's doing it. And if they can do it, I can do it. But what more can we do to promote our face, and then also that diversity that's not always seen in high places?
Yeah, it's a great question. These are some of the things that we talk about in the book. People, we often now get terms for some of these things now. The microaggressions that happen. You
Right.
have the certain credentials, and yet for whatever reason, nobody wants to use that, because they feel like, other people will feel bad because they don't have them, as opposed to giving you your due, which is amazing, right? But when somebody else enters the room, it doesn't look like you, they're automatically, they use the credentials. Those things still happen. So I'll give you one of the things from the book that we talk about, because what we find in talking to a lot of Black professionals is, I get in these situations, I don't know what to do, and I feel like I have limited options as to what to do. We have a framework we call the 4 Fs. Yes, I said 1, 2, 3, 4, and the letter F, because each of the things I'm going to tell you starts with the letter F. You have a choice when you're in those kind of situations, which will make it better potentially for somebody else coming down the road. Often we think that our only option is the fight, and sometimes that is the option. Each of these options has a pluses and minuses, but certainly when you fight, you push back on the system and say why something is wrong. Sometimes we are engaged in flight, where you fly away, get out of that situation, and tend to be, thinking about how I'm going to get out of this. But of course, that doesn't support the future, because it doesn't solve the problem. Some people go through the 3rd F, forego. Oh, well, in this situation, I'm going to try to get through it right now, but I'm going to remember it and try to deal with it at a later date. And then there's a last one. The last F is friend. And that's a tricky one. In situations where you are in these kinds of things happening, and you see some microaggressions and racism peering out from underneath what the situation, what you need to do is think about, is this somebody who I can educate? Is this somebody who I can think about trying to turn their perspective, help them understand why what they said and what they did was offensive? And the reason we talk about that in the book is because sometimes we feel disempowered in these kind of situations. And what we want people to understand is that you actually have options. You have strategic choices you can make. And I'm not going to say which one is the appropriate one for the particular situation. That's what you got to evaluate. But don't sit there and think that, woe is me, I have nothing I can do. This is not, my fight. In reality, we all have to deal with these things. And all the people we profile in the book have dealt with them, and yet they still have risen to the top.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we've got 2 very special guests, Dr. Randal Pinkett, co-founder and CEO of BCT Partners, and Dr. Jeffrey Robinson, who's also the co-founder of BCT Partners. Both of them are the authors of the book. The latest release is Black Faces in High Places. And then we've also got Black Faces in White Places. But when we talk about Black Faces in High Places, Dr. Randal, I joked with you earlier, and I said, talk to us about how long it actually took to make the book. And I asked you the question off camera, but the answer deserves a camera response. So tell us about how long did it actually take you, and how you got there.
Yes, we wrote Black Faces in White Places in 2010. And that was in the age of Obama. In fact, there's a quote from Cornel West on the book that says, "It's a must read in the age of Obama. Oh, how we long for the age of Obama." And when we submitted it to the publisher, it was 500 pages. And they said, your contract only asked for 250. Perhaps we should have read it more closely. So we cut that book down to 250 pages. And then there's this rumor that Prince has this vault of music that we're still waiting for songs to come out. So we had this vault of content that we had put on the shelf. So then fast forward to 2020, George Floyd gets murdered. We're now winding down the Trump administration and the beginnings of the Biden administration. COVID-19, all of these developments elevated the conversation about the value of Black lives, the need for Black leadership, societal inequities and disparities that exist and are persistent. And again, COVID and George Floyd brought all of that to the forefront, as did the Trump administration. So as Dr. Robinson and I are business partners and close friends for life, we hang out all the time, and we're hanging out saying, you know what, this is the time to go into the vault and get that content. And so so we spent about 2 full days a month, 8 hours a day. And that was together. And then we probably had about 8 hours of writing assignments each month. We divided and conquered on each chapter, found a new framework, did new interviews on top of the previous set of interviews, and then artfully brought that together into a modern day 2022 Black faces in high places journey that we believe is relevant to the day and relevant to the times.
Yeah. Dr. Robinson, talk to me about this for a moment. When we talk about success, we see Black faces in high places. We see Black faces in white places. Give me your assessment as to how do you see things right now when it comes to African-American men and women in the area of the professional landscape? Because we can say we've seen some success, but by far a whole lot more work needs to be done.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's nice to see that there are some folks who've made it to the highest heights. There's just not enough. If we can still be making, being first in 2020, 2021, 2022. But that's not our issue. We think that's fine to be the first, but if you're the last, that's where the problem is. Mm-hmm. If you're the only one and then there's nobody behind you, and you're not making a way for other folks to come behind you that look like you, then again, therein lies the problem. It's not just about success, it's also about significance. Success is for the moment, but significance is timeless. That's where we think, another theme that we pull through the whole book is really important, that it's not just about you. So you can get to the highest heights of an organization or making your way on the way up to the top. And if you think it's all about you, you've lost out on some of the meaning of life, because it isn't just about you. And in particular for the Black community, we need to be thinking about how our actions and what we can do within companies, corporations, organizations, and in entrepreneurship, how it can have a double and triple bottom line type of effect, where it's not just about doing good things for the business or organization. It's also about thinking about what are the potential positive impacts for our community. And so when you put that kind of thinking in, now you can start to see how we as a community can actually do some change. And that's a responsibility. Some folks, want to sort of shy away from that. But what we've learned over these last few years, especially going back to the murder of George Floyd, we are all connected. You can't be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and see what happened with George Floyd and not feel some connection. I mean, that's one of the things we profiled right at the beginning of the book. Ken Frazier said it. He was CEO of Merck & Company. He said, he saw himself in what was happening with George Floyd. We need more thinking like that at the top of the organization, and that will start to help us to make way for others to follow our path.
Keeping in that vein, Dr. Randal, let's talk about this here. When we talk about 3.2% of African Americans find themselves in senior or executive leadership, 1% only finds themselves at the top when it comes to Fortune 500 companies as far as African Americans are concerned. Give me the significance of being able to see more in the area of senior and executive leadership.
You hit a core issue that we address in the book, and we just wrote a blog for Blavity on this very topic. Black leadership matters. And you ask the question, why does it matter? When you look at the economic resources at the disposal of a Fortune 500 corporation. When you look at the social impact a national or international nonprofit can or cannot wield, when you look at the decisions that elite entrepreneurs can make about what to do with their resources. I mean, look at Robert Smith. I mean, imagine if we all had the ability to say, I'm going to just fund the entire graduating class of an HBCU. I mean, just think about that.
Right.
And think about what Ken Frazier was able to do, or Ken Chenault, or Ursula Burns at Xerox, Merck, and American Express, respectively. We're talking about companies who have GDPs or have economic resources that are beyond those of countries across the globe. And so the ability to effectuate change, to impact jobs, to transform lives, to transform families, neighborhoods, and communities is not lost on us. And without that representation, somebody else is pulling levers for somebody else. And so another word that we use intentionally in the book is be unapologetic. In the first book, we said, if you're not playing the game is playing you. In this book, the equivalent is, if you're not pulling levers for our community, somebody else is pulling levers for their community. So we don't just want Black faces in high places for the sake of having them there. That's called Clarence Thomas. We want Black faces in high places. Don't forget who they are, where they came from, and see and wield the resources at their disposal to benefit our community.
Dr. Randal Pinkett, we got to leave it there. Dr. Jeffrey Robinson, they are the co-founders of BCT Partners, and they're also the authors of 2 books, Black Faces, the most recent, In High Places, Black Faces in White Places. We encourage you to go and get their books on all those platforms. You know how to get them. Matter of fact, before we leave, you tell them, how can they get the book? How about that?
Yeah, so you can go to either of our websites. I'm at randalpinkett.com with 1 L. He is at jeffreyrobinsonphd.com, because there's other Jeffrey Robinsons out there. He's the PhD Jeffrey Robinson.
Yes.
And the information is right there. And you can find me on social media at Randal Pinkett with 1 L. And you can find him at J Robinson PhD on all social media platforms.
I thank you both for joining us. Good. You
Dr. Robinson had a closing. Dr. Robinson.
Yeah.
No, that's, you said it all. You've got it all. Look for our hashtags. We've got the Black Faces in High Places book, BFHP book. There's also a challenge going on right now. And what the challenge is all about is just highlighting Black faces in high places that you admire and support. So look for the challenge that is posted all over social media, and we look forward to interacting with you.
All right, I ain't gonna start no trouble because I gotta go. My producer's gonna kill me, but I'm gonna ask this one last question before we get. Is there another book in the works here?
Another book? It took us so long to do these 2.
We just got finished spending all this time together, right?
You never know. Stay tuned.
Don't be surprised.
Listen, when it comes to both of y'all and the skills and what you bring to the table, we would not be surprised. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. Dr. Randal Pinkett, Dr. Jeffrey Robinson, our guests. Listen, we want you to stay with us. We do have more show coming up. Don't go anywhere. The Social Justice Forums continues right after this.